Hello, in this 1 hour presentation we are going to take a close look at Artobolevskaya's book called The First Meet with the Music. Um, and we are going to compare that to some other Russian piano books, which helps us understand why Artobolevskaya's book is creme de la creme of all Russian piano books available for beginners. One of the books that we are going to compare is the Russian School of Piano Playing. This one is available, was translated into English, and it's available on Amazon to buy. It's in 2 volumes, also known as Nikolaev's book in Russia, because the main editor was Nikolaev. So we're going to use this one. And Artobolevskaya's book was not translated into English yet, but you can find it on Amazon if you insist. It's not always available, but every once in a while it's there, and you can find it. Or if you have access to websites with in Russian language, and if you do a little research, there are some websites that offer this book for a free download. So it's again Anna Artobolevskaya's book called The First Meet with the Music. Now, if you open any Russian piano book, you'll see that the very first music that is there for the student, there are folklore music that they were arranged for the 3rd fingers. This page is from the Russian School of Piano Playing, or the Nikolaev's book that I just showed you. And this is the very first page in the book where the student gets to play the piano. Before that, there are some singing and theory parts in the book. And this very first piece introduced in the book is, as you see, arranged for the 3rd fingers to play non-legato tunes, and the fingers, the 2 hands are not playing at the same time. So let's take a closer look at the music part of the same page, so that you see better what I'm talking about. So this brings up the question of why is it that in Russian books they start with the middle finger, and why is it that they start with folk tunes? By answering these 2 questions, we will answer the core philosophy of teaching in Russian methods. I have more examples from another book. This one is called The Little Pianist. Unfortunately, again, not available in English, but I want to show you just other examples. As you see here, we have also 3rd fingers. They play a non-legato tune. This one is a Russian song. This one is Ukrainian folk tune and Russian folk tune. Now, back to the question of why is it that we start with folk tunes. The first simple answer that comes to mind is because a folk tune is a familiar tune for the child. So if you're introducing music to a Russian child, it makes sense to start with the Russian folk tune, because that's something that the child has been singing, or at least hearing in his or her life before walking into your lesson. That familiarity helps a lot, because you don't want to have your first lesson feel like a strange or too formal or scary experience for the student. But there is more into that. There's because experience showed me that I can teach Russian folk tunes to Iranian children and Iranian folk tunes to American children, and it still gives me a good result. So what is it about the folk tune that makes it a good choice for your very first few lessons. Heinrich Neuhaus, a professor at Moscow Conservatory, who wrote The Art of Piano Playing, writes in his book that work on the artistic image should begin at the very first stage of learning the piano and note reading. By this I mean that if a child is able to reproduce some very simple melody, it is essential to make this first performance expressive. In other words, that the nature of the performance should correspond to the nature or the content of the melody. For this purpose, it is especially advisable to use folk tunes in which the emotional and poetic element is much more apparent than even in the best educational compositions for children. So, here's the answer to the first question. Why is it that they use, in Russian school, they use folk tune? Because as you see, this content of the music is the first thing that we focus on when we start to play any piece of music on any instrument. I'm sure as a pianist, if you're watching this video, I assume that you are having a lot of experience playing the piano and taking lessons. And in advanced level, you have already experienced this idea that everything starts with the content of the piece that we are playing. Now, the difference in Russian school is that for the very beginner, for the very first lesson, they do the same thing. They start with a music that has a content, that has a meaning, and they start the lesson with that meaning and story. Because playing an instrument is nothing but understanding the content of the piece and being able to reproduce it in sounds. That also brings another idea that I want to mention here. If you want your student to continue playing good quality music and be interested in the music that you are interested to teach, which I assume is good quality music, classical music, then you want to make sure that that music becomes familiar for them. So if we start with something that is familiar already, then we want to introduce the music literature to them, the literature that is appropriate for his or her age, so that in the future they will continue playing good quality music and don't bring you those cheesy songs. Now, when we say that in beginning level, in the very first lessons, we talk about the content of music, what does that mean? I'm bringing this example from Artobolevskaya's book to open that idea and explain it. This piece from Artobolevskaya's book is called "Where Are You, Loka?" But that's not the real name of this piece. In fact, this piece is an exercise written by Artobolevskaya. So you see that I'm contradicting myself, because here Artobolevskaya is actually not using a folk tune, but she's using an exercise. I'll tell you why. For the same reason that a good pianist will change an etude to a piece of music, and a bad pianist can change a piece of music to an etude, here, in the same way, a good teacher can change an exercise to a piece of music that has a story to tell, or a bad teacher can change a piece of music into an exercise. What Artobolevskaya does with this piece, first of all, I wanted to show the whole page so that you see how the book is different from other Russian books by having a full color, full page illustration. And then let's take a closer look at the music part. think this exercise has a very good potential um, to become a piece of music, meaning to have a content for the student to work on. It's a beautiful melody in left hand, a simple, nice accompaniment in right hand, and it's in a minor key. Um, so what happens here is Artobolevskaya is introducing playing this piece and a couple of other pieces for the student in class. The student gets to choose the one that he or she likes better. Let's say the student chooses this one, and then the teacher and the student start to talk about the content of the piece. They start to create a story for the music. For for example, in this one, Artobolevska's student name was Loka, and he imagines this song being about his dog, who is alone at home and bored and waiting for Loka to come back home. So that was the child's story about the piece, um, which to me makes sense because the repeated notes in the right hand in the accompaniment have this feeling of um, waiting. Um, so that's how this piece got the name "Where Are You, Loka?" And then the student got to draw a picture for it. I also want to mention that in Artobolevskaya's time, back in the Soviet Union's time, there was no copy machines, of course, in each apartment. So she would rewrite the piece of music that students choose in a blank piece of sheet of paper, and let them illustrate it, and also create do some lyrics for every single song that they're playing. The lyric not only helps the student to understand and reinforce the story, it also helps with feeling the rhythm of the piece, um, and getting the rhythm very easily. So this is an example of how we start with the content of the music, and then based on that content and the story that we made, we have to make sure that we have the right tools to make that story sound right, and that tool is called technique. So that is what Newhouse calls in his book the artistic image of the piece. So the artistic image is the story, the content. Now, talking about the content, the next thing that is important to keep in mind is that when you choose the next piece for your student, you want to be sure that it's not only the note reading, the musical alphabet, or the pianistic difficulties that is the right choice for the student, but also you want to make sure that the content of the piece is something that is um, a good choice for that child. For example, Artobolevskaya writes in the beginning of her book that specifically this piece called Winter is a very sad and dark piece. And she says that you want to make sure that your 5-year-old student can handle the darkness of this piece before you suggest this piece to the child. Because otherwise the sadness can be too scary for them, and just simply not the right choice for the child. Um, that brings the next idea to mind, that in advanced level or in intermediate level, the same idea stays valid. I mean, if a 9-year-old student is able to play the notes for Moonlight Sonata, or if your 8-year-old student is able to play the notes for the C major prelude from well-tempered clavier, that doesn't mean that that's the right choice for them, because the content of the piece is the content of the piece requires more life experience and understanding, and that is not yet a good choice for a young child. Very often I see that those easier to play pieces are victims of this mistake that teachers make. Um, on the subject of content, I also want to tell you why is it that in Russian books you will not see a simplified version of Ode to Joy or The Little Night Music in 8 measures, arranged for a 5-year-old student to play, because that simply doesn't make sense. Um, so we start with folk tunes, and there are so many original pieces of music written by great composers for younger age that we can use. So there is no need to simplify um, Ode to Joy or even For Elise, very popular in American books. This is just a closer look at the winter piece that we were just talking about. But I want to move on and continue with the next question, which is how this book, Artobolevskaya's book, came into being. Artobolevskaya writes at the beginning of the book that this is just a collection of the pieces for you to add to your library, and this is not a book that you would teach page by page, or this is not the only book that you want to have when you start with your young beginners. So she's reminding us that in Russian methods, there is no one book that a teacher could buy and just turn the page, the next page, and the next page, and teach the same pieces in the same order to all the students. Because simply, first of all, each student is different. Each student is unique. And their interest is different, their learning abilities are different, and therefore each student requires a different approach and collection of pieces. Some can go way faster, and some need a lot more easier pieces before they can go to the next step. During the last 12 years preparing teachers in our school to teach in this method, I'm realizing that the hardest thing for those who are not familiar with Russian school of teaching is the ability of choosing the next piece, because here you need to know your material really, really well and be able to quickly in class decide which 2 or 3 pieces you are going to introduce to the student as a new piece. And that at the beginning can be a little bit uh, intimidating, but I want to encourage you to jump into it. I want to encourage you to buy this book and start little by little adding these pieces to the pieces that you're teaching. If you are getting our emails from the Russian Piano Pedagogy website, monthly free emails with easy pieces arranged in this method, that's another collection, that small collection that you already have or you are collecting for your students. And hopefully by reading the book, A Thousand Stories for a Little Pianist, and by listening to this, you can start uh, understanding and building your own repertoire for your students by arranging more and more music for them. That's how my book came into being, by arranging um, easy songs for my students over the years. Then I had a collection to publish, and that's easier than what it looks like actually. Now, back to the first question. We already answered the question of why we use folk song, right? So we said that Russian school begins and focuses on the content of the music, or what Newhouse calls the artistic image of the piece. But the second question was, why is it that they start with the third finger? So this is one of the pieces from the Little Pianist book, which is unfortunately not available here. But as you see in this example, we have a Russian folk song that was arranged for third fingers, and the hands are not playing at the same time. So you can, this is just the first step of teaching, and you can use any folk tune that has the potential to be played non-legato and arrange it in this way for your students. But why is it that they start with third finger? First of all, because the third finger is the pivot of the hands, and that is something that Chopin also mentions in his book. His piano method book that he never finished. When he talks about each finger, he mentions that third finger is the pivot of the hand. Now, if you drop your hand freely into the key, the first finger that is going to touch the key is the third finger. So by using that third finger only, what you're doing is you're actually focusing and building the big muscles. So you're not starting with the muscles of the fingers, but you are starting with the muscles of arm, shoulders, right? And the whole upper body. Because here the hand can freely lift away from the keys and drop into the keys, right? Going up and down with the help of big muscles, which are our arms. So that's another important thing, because here we're starting with relaxation of the hand and big movements of the hand. Another reason we start with third finger and non-legato is that this is actually the easiest skill to learn on the piano, because here the student only needs to focus on creating one sound at a time and shaping or holding one finger. So he doesn't need to work to shape the whole 5 fingers, which can be stiffening and very difficult, especially for a child. This is how Artobolevskaya is working in her book, is showing how to work on the big muscles and prepare them for sitting at the piano. You see, the student is starting with leaning forward and moving her arms back and forth, and in this way she is relaxing the shoulders and arm and forearm all the way to the fingertips. As you see in this last picture, as the student is moving the arms back and forth and dropping forward, here the upper body, the shoulders, arm and forearm are totally relaxed and dropped. So this is one preparation before the student sits at the piano. I actually want to mention that this is a very good exercise for adult students when they come to your lesson after a long day of work. They need that relaxation more than children usually do need that. Then this is another one, rotating the arm, that also helps to get rid of any tension that might be in the shoulder area. And only after the student relax the shoulder and arm, the he or she would sit at the piano, and Artobolevskaya would shake the hand and help them play. In this picture, you will see how she's holding the student's hand. The wrist is resting in the teacher's hand, and the teacher is shaping the third finger and literally playing with it. But before that, we have one more thing to do, and that is making sure that the wrist is relaxed and the finger knows how to touch the key. So here, Artobolevskaya has another little trick. She tells the student, give me your arm as if it was mine for a minute, and then I'll give it back to you. By that, she means that you want to totally relax your arm and do not hold any muscle, so that if you drop it, it will fall. So it's going to fall into my hands. Then Artobolevskaya makes a bread dough, which I don't have the picture here, but makes a bread dough by rotating the forearm back and forth. You can see the picture in my book, 1,000 Stories for a Little Pianist. And that helps the student to relax the forearm and the wrist. Here, Artobolevskaya is helping the student to understand which part of the fingertip is supposed to touch the key. And that works like a magic. You can explain it forever to the student, how to shape the hand, how to curve the finger, how to hold an apple. But by doing this, they actually feel which part of the finger, which is the fingertip, is going to touch the key, and how the finger is going to be shaped. And then they just transfer that same feeling into the keys. Artobolevskaya likes to use an eraser of the pencil for this, because she thinks that the elastic movement of eraser has a closer feeling to the keyboard. So these are our preparation for the third finger, and only after that she would hold the finger like this, as you see, and let the student to, as she mentions, dive into the key all the way to the end of the key with that fingertip, grabbing the key lightly, slightly. And of course, then that's just half of the process. The other half of the process is how you lift away from the key your hand, and that is when you want to hold the student's forearm and arm and let them lift the hand up from the key gradually. On the question of hand position, Artobolevskaya writes, the student should feel that his hands are gifts from heaven to help him create what he wants to create with sound. He should understand that his hands can talk with loud or soft voice, angrily, nicely, with a singing tone, or screaming. Anything that he can feel and talk about, he can create with his fingers. Now, these are some examples of pieces to be played for third finger. We already looked at this page before, but here I want to compare the two books. As you see in the Russian school of piano playing, the very beginning pieces are introduced in a very dry way. Um, this might be a good choice for adult beginner or teenager, but when it comes to young students, I wouldn't use this page because there is no illustration, the notes are written too small, and there is a lot of words. This simply looks too dry and not children friendly. This is the first page from Artobolevskaya's book. It's called Dog's Waltz. So first of all, the piece introduced here is a duet. So this top line is played by the student, and the notes with the stem going down are for left hand and the stem going up for right hand. And the other line is the accompaniment for the teacher, or according to Artobolevskaya, it's simple enough for the parent, even if they don't know music, to learn it in class and go home and play it with the child. So the fact that you start with a waltz, that you start with a piece that has accompaniment, and you start with a book that has big full color illustrations, makes Artobolevskaya's book very different from any other Russian book. I really like this piece for many reasons. First of all, it's a waltz, so I can already tell the student that waltz is a dance that it always sounds like 1 2 3 1 2 3. Even you're not talking about time signature here, but you can talk about the feeling of dance. I also like it because the notes cover all the white keys. So when the student is ready to um, play a piece on all the white keys, meaning recognizing all the white keys, this is a good choice. Playing a duet is not only fun, but it helps with a lot of other things. For example, here, even though the student does not play accompaniment, and is far away from playing melody and accompaniment by himself or by herself, I get a chance to talk about it, and they get a chance to experience it, so they can understand that their part, which is the melody, is going to be the one that we want to hear, and the other part, the accompaniment, is going to be quieter. I also want to mention that this is from before note reading period in the book. That means here the student is not playing this piece looking at the notes, but he or she is playing it looking at the teacher's hands. And I will explain it to you in a little bit. I want to go back to the steps of understanding this method, how it goes. So the very first step, as we already realized, is playing with third fingers, a non-legato piece that has a content. Now, the next step, after the student mastered how to drop freely into the key with the third finger and lift away from it, and build a relaxation of the hands, the next step is playing short legato lines. This is an example of legato playing in the Russian school of piano playing. I remember my piano pedagogy teacher, Irina Temchenko, in Gnestin School in Moscow, criticized this book, and one of her critics was that the book starts with very long legatos, which is very challenging for a beginner. So I want to compare this to Artobolevskaya's legato. The first time legato appears in Artobolevskaya's book is this one. So as you see, the the student gets to play short legatos, dropping on fourth finger, connecting it to third, and then lifting it up from second finger. And the student gets to experience it both in right hand and left hand, over and over. So this short legato for only three fingers, and the fingers being the long fingers, fourth, third, and second, is a much better choice to introduce legato playing to a beginner. Here is a closer look at that piece. Again, this is an exercise by Lyakhovitskaya, but in Artobolevskaya's book, it turns into a piece. Sounds like a dialogue between right hand and left hand. Sounds like teasing. That's what she calls it, or the student calls it. As you see, this one, which is introduced in the very beginning pages of the book, has some difficult note readings. The way it works in Russia is, of course, different because the student gets to go to piano lesson twice a week, and in addition to that, they have other solfege classes where they get to learn and work on note reading a lot. Here, I live in California and I get to see my student once a week only. So what I did, to make this method work, I color code the notes for my students. So when the student wants to play a piece that the skills are useful for him or her, but the note reading is a little bit challenging, I don't stop my student from learning a skill just because they cannot read a few notes in the piece. But I just color those notes, which already have a color code, and let the student experience the skill. So the color coding goes this way. When I teach the keys, the name of the keys, I let the student choose a color for each key. Let's say if G is green, if she or he chooses A to be blue and B to be brown, then when we get to this piece, I'll color these three notes, green, blue, and brown for him. In most cases, they already can read these notes. So I only need to color the ones with more ledger lines, and that makes this piece available for them to practice. And note reading is something that we're constantly working on, and sooner or later they will be able to read all the notes, of course. I just don't let it stop them from learning any skill. Now, this is another really nice piece for experiencing short legatos. This is an Ukrainian folk song, also available in the Russian School of Piano Playing book. Just the only difference is you don't have the illustration there. What I like about this piece is, first of all, there are short legatos to work on, and then there is a lot of repetition. So even though the piece is pretty long for a beginner, but the repetitions makes it easy to memorize and work on. I like to analyze the piece with the student from the very early steps. So when we are working on this piece, I ask them to find the similar parts so that they can see the structure of the piece. And as we move on, we'll go on and understand the form of the piece. So this is the very first step of understanding the musical structure or form. Here's a closer look at that. As you see in this piece, we have fifth and first fingers also. This is actually a very good preparation for playing chords because here the student gets to play it in a broken way. Now, the piece that I love to use for introducing legato is this etude by Yelena Gnesina for many reasons. First of all, um, I like to talk about Gnesina because I went to Gnesina school and she was one of the founders with her other sisters. So I like to tell my students about her. Um, Secondly, this piece lets the student experience dropping on third finger, making a legato to second finger, and lifting it from there, which is the easiest legato movement. Only two notes legato with third and second fingers. The piece also gives this opportunity to both left hand and right hand. Um, Another thing I like about this piece is that it has a question and answer. You don't have to talk about dominant, tonic, and all that, but you can simply show the student by playing the piece that the first line ends as if you are in the middle of something, as if you are not done yet. So you can make a lyric that is a question. It can be as simple as, "Mommy, can I have ice cream?" Because it is a simple piece. It's really not nothing more than that. And then the second line feels like you answered that question, and here you arrived somewhere, and you don't need to move any further. So just the feeling of question and answer is what I talk about to my beginner student here. And again, making lyrics helps them feel it better. Okay, so let's take a look at what we did so far. The first step was non-legato pieces arranged for third fingers only. After the student master that, the next step is short legatos played with long fingers, third, second, fourth, occasionally. And again, still, we're not playing both hands together at the same time. We're playing, the melody is split between the hands so that the student can control the sound and the hands. So, any folk tune or children's songs that has short legato movement, you can arrange it and use it for this step. It's important to remember that you want to forget about position and make sure that the hand is free and dropping on third finger and lifting from second or fourth, depending on what your piece is. So there is no first finger, fifth finger, and there's no position involved. After that step, and after you played a few more legatos and maybe longer legatos, the next step will be for the student to play melody and accompaniment. And of course, we start with easy accompaniments. This is one example from Artobolevskaya's book, as you already recognize the illustration. This is a lullaby by Philip. As you see, the accompaniment is a simple fifth interval that is held and repeated all over the piece. And the right hand is playing longer legatos, the melody. Artobolevskaya says that the best way to talk about melody and accompaniment and help the student to balance the voices between the two hands is creating story again. So here she is using the story of a mommy bear who is singing a lullaby, and that is our right hand, right? And the left hand is that bumblebee back farther in the room, who is stuck in the honey and is asking for help. So the bumblebees keep singing help, and that's the sound of the left hand. If you play this lullaby for the student and ask them which hand is saying help and is a bumblebee, they will be able to tell you. So that image definitely helps them to keep the left hand quiet. But Artobolevskaya goes farther, and she says that the legs of the bee are stuck into the honey, just like our first and fifth finger of the left hand are stuck into the keys. So using that image, she's helping the student to make that beautiful shape of the hand with the fifth and first finger going deeply into the key, but the palm of the hand not touching the keyboard and being away from it, because you don't want the bee's tummy, for example, to be also stuck in the honey, right? So that makes the beautiful shape, which I call it a horseshoe, from tip of the fifth finger making a U all the way to the tip of the first finger. That's the horseshoe that I tell my students, because it needs to feel as strong and U shape as a horseshoe. So Artobolevskaya using that image to help the student do it. But again, when it comes to shaping the student's hands, the best way to do it is by touching the hand and literally shaping it with your hands. You want to touch the forearm and the wrist and make sure that it's relaxed and there is no tension in the muscles. These are some examples from the Russian School of Piano Playing for playing melody and accompaniment. So you see, very similar. So you have the legato melodies in the right hand, and again fifth intervals in the left hand. Okay, so far we have 3 steps. Let's review it. The first step was non-legato, third finger only. The second step was short legatos, long fingers. And now we're doing all the fingers, melody in one hand and accompaniment in left hand, but very simple accompaniment. Because remember, here the student is experiencing to work with both hands at the same time for the first time, and that's pretty challenging. More examples for melody and accompaniment. So I mean this one and this one, pretty similar. When it comes to this step, melody and accompaniment, there are plenty of examples out there that you can find in other books, not only Russian books. Because so when the student gets to this step, they already build the relaxation of the hand, and they are already ready to use all the fingers. So you have more variety out there to use, variety of the pieces. Now that we talked about those steps, and of course after that it's obvious, we just continue with more complicated accompaniments and then polyphonic pieces and so on. But then when is it in this teaching method that the student gets to learn musical alphabet? So we're going to talk about that a little bit. Artobolevskaya mentions at the beginning of her book that there are many ways to introduce the notes to the student, but the important thing is not to scare them away from something difficult, but introduce them in a way that is like a very interesting game. So remember that the theory part of music can be very boring. and especially for the young students, it can be um, dry and intimidating too. So you want to always, when you're working with a child, make that part the most fun part of your lesson by using games, stories that help you introduce any musical alphabet that you're teaching. That is the fun part of the lesson for the teacher, because the teacher gets to improvise the story, a story to teach the certain thing that he is teaching in class, and and that is the part that you get to be creative and improvise. You want to make sure that the story that you are using is appropriate for the age, for the student's age, they can understand it, and it also fulfills your pedagogical goal. For example, if you're teaching rhythm values, rhythm has to do with time. So you want to show that this note takes a longer time compared to this other note, right? So for that reason, I never use the idea of whole note being a pizza and half note being half of a pizza, because pizza has nothing to do with time. Rather, I prefer to say that this whole note is, let's say, an animal who walks slower and takes longer time to get to destination, compared to eighth note, which is a faster animal and gets there quicker. Um, Also, you want to make sure that you don't scare the student using very big words. A 5-year-old student doesn't need to hear time signature or key signature, but all they need to know is the concept of it. They can learn the names, the big names, later. I'm talking about all these stories while this cover of this book is showing on my screen. This is a book by Faina Briansky, as you can see, that has a lot of games, not, maybe not games, but a lot of stories to use to teach for your to your children, students, musical alphabet. Not that this is the best or this is something extraordinary, but it's an example for those of you who have never tried teaching using stories. If you have your own stories, just stay with that, and being creative is always more fun. This book I'm bringing as an example just because it's available here, and also because my piano pedagogy teacher in Russia introduced it to me. This is her friend. Faina is her friend. Now, as I mentioned before, when we talked about the dog's waltz, I told you that this piece is introduced when the student doesn't play looking at the notes, but the student is playing looking at the teacher's hand. So let's talk about that a little bit. In Artobolevskaya's book, the first 4 pieces are the ones that are designed for before note reading period. And that is true in other Russian piano books. The beginning section is not for playing, looking at them. Artobolevskaya writes that in my class, I try and let the child play a very simple song as soon as possible. Therefore, in the first few lessons, I let them play simple non-legato pieces with third fingers without looking at the notes. At this very early stage, I have the student's attention not only on what note to play, what key to find, but also on how each key sounds or talks under his or her fingers, third fingers. So because the student is very busy at the very first few lessons, learning how to sit at the piano, how to relax their hands, how to listen to the sound that they're creating, then it's not um, a good time to put the notes in front of them and just add another information for them to digest. So what happens in class, the student is learning the first few pieces in the first few lessons, just looking at the teacher's hands, and there is a lot of ear training involved when you're doing it. And while we're doing that, in those same lessons, the student is learning how to read the notes, clap for the rhythm values, and gets to learn about treble clef, bass clef. I rather call them G clef, F clef, just because the name is easier, and the grind staff, and read a few notes. Only after the students' hands are ready, um, and are more or less relaxed, and the student can easily recognize the rhythm values, whole note, half note, eighth note, quarter note, dotted half note, and can easily read 5 or 6 notes on the staff, then it's time to put the music in front of them. As we already talked about the Dog's Waltz, this is the very first piece that Artobolevskaya plays in class, or at least introduces in her book, and that is before the student plays looking at the notes. All 4 pieces for before note reading in her book are duets. So this is the first one. Here's the second one. What is interesting about this piece, Artobolevskaya mentions at the beginning of her book that the way that this piece came into her class. The student comes to class with a souvenir someone brought from Switzerland. The souvenir is a music box. You open the box and you hear this tune. So obviously the child is interested in that little new toy. What Artobolevskaya does, instead of telling her, okay, now put your toy away and it's time for your piano lesson, she sits at the piano, plays the same tune, writes it down for the child, and they play that song together in class. So that's just one example of how you can bring music to the child's life rather than bringing the child into your lesson. Um, this is a very nice tune, but I don't give this to all my students because the rhythm here can be a little bit confusing for the beginner. So I introduce it to them, I play it to them, but only if they ask to play it. Then I will go ahead and help them learn it. Next one in Artobolevskaya's book is the song. This is a motif from Franz Liszt Rhapsody, Hungarian Rhapsody, arranged for 2 pianists, for 4 hands. As you see, the rhythm here is quite challenging for a beginner, but since the student is not playing looking at the notes and picking the rhythm by ear, that solves the problem. You also see that the student is already playing the B flat. So again, in Russian books, you don't see the student being stuck with C major and A minor for a long time. Or even worse than that, in some books, some American books, what I see that they introduce a piece that is, let's say, in F major, but they don't put the key signature for the piece. I don't know, they probably think that it's difficult for the student, but not in Russian method. In Russian method, It's like you drop the child into water and they start swimming. It's not that you hold them on the shore for a year and then they don't get to touch the water. So there's a lot of music from the very first lesson. Again, this piece has a lot of repetition, which helps the beginners learn it easier. So you want to uh, show the student those repetition. That helps them uh, learn it and memorize it. The next one, Artobolevskaya's book, is Ukrainian folk dance. Here, as you see, the student is already playing with 4, 3, 2 finger numbers, and this is a very nice piece for beginners. But as you probably noticed, Artobolevskaya's book, even the very first piece, is already pretty hard because the student, to be able to play that dog's waltz, they need to know all the names of the 7 white keys. So in my class, um, I I can teach that only in the third lesson. So I start with easier pieces that require only 2 or 3 white keys, and we master that before we go ahead and have all the 7 white keys in the piece. So you, as we talked about it already, you're going to need a lot of other pieces to add to this Artobolevskaya book if you're using it, to make it a smooth move. Otherwise, it's going to go too fast and challenging. Okay, so we talked about Artobolevskaya for an hour, but we um, never really met her. Here she is. Anna Danilovna Artobolevskaya was born 1905 and lived until 1988. She was an outstanding teacher at the Moscow Central Music School. She was known for her endless enthusiasm and creative approach towards every individual student. And she writes that the teacher is not only teaching music but also trying to help the student's personality to grow using the music as a tool. I'm going to finish with what Artobolevskaya says at the very beginning of her book, a quote from Dmitri Shostakovich that says, "Study the great art of music and love it. This art will open the door to an abundance of a higher level of spiritual and intellectual life. It will make your soul more rich, more pure. You will see the life in different colors and different sounds." I hope this presentation will bring some new tools and ideas to your music studio. Thank you.